Today we have another of our Deep Trouble series. Deep Trouble is an exclusive series found only here on Adventure Rider Radio. Deep Trouble is stories from riders that have experienced breakdowns, being lost, catastrophes, injuries, and other issues that have led them into deep trouble. And of course, no one really wants to be in trouble, but if there was no threat to dodge, no line in the sand to skirt, no precipitous edge to approach, there would be no adventure. And because that adventure lives in the gray zone between safety and danger, it's all about riding the gray zone, your gray zone, whatever that is. And our Deep Trouble series is about helping you ride the gray zone without crossing into danger. We do this by hearing stories of those who have fallen into trouble, struggled, and returned with lessons for all of us, and how to avoid deep trouble. Or if you do find yourself in a situation, tips, ideas, and tricks that may help you. And on this episode of Deep Trouble, Doug Oosterhouse makes really kind of one small mistake in the sand and everything grinds to a halt. But surrounding that one small mistake are just a whole bunch of other factors that could have changed the outcome one way or another. And that's really our focus today on Deep Trouble. I'm Jim Martin. This is Adventure Rider Radio. Stay with us. We got a good one for you.
I'm Sam Manitou, Simon Vince, Simon Baby,
Helge Pedersen,
Charlie Bowman,
Chris Birch,
Elizabeth Martin,
Jocelyn Snow,
Quentin Smote, and you're listening to Adventure Rider Radio.
Best Rest Products is the maker of the Cycle Pump, the best tire inflator for motorcyclists. You can inflate a flat tire in less than 3 minutes. Is founded, assembled, and warranted for life in the USA. They're also the inventor and retailer of the combination tire iron / wrench, the Hex Wrench, cyclepump.com. And Green Chili Adventure Gear offers American-made, heavy-duty luggage systems for all types of motorcycles. You can turn any dry bag into luggage using their strapping system. And of course, Green Chili Adventure Gear is tested in extreme weather and terrain to withstand the abuse that adventure riding gives it. Tough, reliable gear, greenchiliadv.com. It's wind pressure that powers the Moto Breeze chain oiler. No electrical or vacuum connections. It delivers the oil to a felt pad on your swing arm. No nozzles near your sprockets. 1 ounce of oil gets 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers. Get more miles from your chain and sprockets. MotoBreeze.com. The Haywire Grade Trail is a 32-mile or 51-kilometer multi-use trail that runs from Manistee to Shingleton in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was actually the state's first rail trail. It follows the old Manistee and Lake Superior Railroad, so it's a mix of gravel, coarse limestone, and loose sand. The trail's open year-round to off-road vehicles of all kinds, snowmobiles, ATVs, hikers, even horseback riders and mountain bikers. And they say the condition varies based on weather and, of course, seasonal maintenance. Now, the other thing they say is that riders using the Haywire Grade Trail should be ready for deep sand in certain sections, which we're going to talk about today a fair bit, and also that riders should have proper trip planning in place. It's vital for a successful ride because there's minimal services along the route and limited cell coverage in these remote areas.
Yes, it's really beautiful area along the Lake Superior shoreline there, which is...
That's Doug Oosterhouse, rides a KLR 650.
Yeah, I'm riding a 2003 Kawasaki KLR 650.
Doug has been riding for how long?
I've been riding for probably about 50 years. Quite a few miles.
Now, on this trip, Doug was with a number of friends.
Yeah, the four people, and all four of us were riding the same model KLR, different years.
Now, that's a regular ride they do.
Yes, it was our annual KLR ride.
And the route that you're taking on this Haywire Grade Trail, you've never been on it before?
No.
So what could possibly go wrong? Doug, welcome to Adventure Rider Radio.
Thanks, Jim. It's a pleasure.
Where are you sitting right now?
I am sitting in my basement in Howell, Michigan.
You mentioned that what we're about to talk about today for Deep Trouble is this one of the rides that you do. But can you talk about these rides that you do with your friends?
Yeah, the rides The KLR ride is typically we ride everywhere. We don't ever trailer anything. We always say if the bike's on a trailer, call the police because it's probably stolen. But so we ride typically all over Michigan. Michigan being, large state, lower peninsula, upper peninsula. And we typically on this KLR ride, we like to ride up to the upper peninsula and try to get there in one day. And we're taking back roads, dirt roads, all the way. So it's a slow process. And then we camp in state forest campgrounds each night. And on this ride, we have a destination and we try to make it there. And if we don't, we'll try and get it the next time. And so that's one ride we do. And the other ride in the fall is our annual Rough It ride, in which we own property in northern Michigan. And everybody knows the date, and people just ride from different parts of Michigan, and we kind of gather there and we camp there for 3-4 nights, as long as you want. And we ride somewhere each day from there and return to the property at night and cook over the fire and just have a nice gathering and some beverages and just hang out. The property's 20 acres, so we have lots of areas for camping. People spread out all over. It's definitely rough camping. There's no water, no electricity. And what you bring in, you pack everything out. And so those are the two main rides we do. And then we do day rides every once in a while, and just 2 events, sometimes motorcycle events and that type of thing. And then of course, the road bikes is a whole different animal. We ride, a lot farther miles for that. I'm kind of a boat nerd, which means I like the Great Lakes freighters. So in the past, it's mainly been a solo ride for me. I like to ride from here to Duluth, Minnesota, stay in a motel, watch the boats come through the channel there, and then I'll ride from there back across Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, to Sault Ste. Marie. I'll spend the night there and watch the boats go through the locks. That's usually by myself.
Well, we're talking about deep trouble, of course, today. You have a deep trouble experience that you're going to tell us about. So what, first of all, just set this up. What trip did this happen on? Which of the trips you were doing with your friends?
This happened on the, what we call the KLR ride. So there was 4 of us, and it happened on the second day of the ride, which the ride was probably only going to be maybe 4 days. But so we got one good day in and about a half of the second day in.
So does somebody plan this in advance, and are you trying to stay on unassumed or gravel roads or something?
Yeah, we kind of, we look at maps, and, we kind of had an idea. We had a destination of Pictured Rocks, which is on the Lake Superior shoreline in the Upper Peninsula. And that was where we were trying to get. But, we have a route that's mainly gravel roads. And if we veer off the route, we know that we need to go north for a while, and then maybe we need to go west for a while, and we just kind of wing it.
And is it one person that's in charge of setting up the route, or does everybody work on it?
Well, it's usually myself and my friend Ray that we normally come up with the plan, and then his son always joins us. So he just kind of goes with the flow. And this particular ride, we had another friend of ours that was tagging along, and he wasn't part of the planning, but he was up for anything.
Let's talk about your bike. How is your bike set up on that particular trip?
The bike is kind of set up for camping. Had the hard panniers, which were basically military ammo boxes mounted on hard pannier racks. Had another ammo box as a trunk, a smaller one. I had a tank bag, and then I also had what they call a fairing pack. that Kawasaki makes, where it just straps onto just below the windshield above the headlight.
A pack does above the headlight?
Yeah, yes. It just kind of fastens around the little small fairing that the first gen KLRs have.
So it's a very small pack.
Yeah, basically I used to just put 4 bottles of water in it. That's what I always had in there.
Right. Let's talk about those military ammo boxes. So for those who don't know what that is, can you talk about what it is and why you'd be putting it on your bike?
Yeah, well, they're tough as nails. Obviously, the military doesn't want their ammunition getting wet or damaged. They're dry. Not a dust particle gets in them. You can throw them off from a cliff, basically, and they'll survive. And they're cheap. They're cheap to buy. That's mainly
like from Army surplus.
Yeah, and that's where I got them. We all run those military panniers on our bikes, and not anymore, but we did then. And you can fit a lot of stuff in them. Everything basically for camping is in there, and they're out of the weather.
How do you mount them to the bike?
We just mount them to pannier racks, standard racks that you can buy, and then we just drill holes in the panniers and made some spacers on the lathe and just bolt them on.
So what's the big attraction? Is it the price or the durability?
Kind of both. The price definitely, and the durability. Like I say, they're almost indestructible. But my friend's son, he did destroy his when he hit a deer with his KLR.
It skidded down the road, sort of thing.
It actually cartwheeled. He was on a dirt road going about 50 miles an hour, and a deer just came out of the woods and he T-boned it. He was uninjured, but it basically looked like a yard sale. All the bits and pieces of the bike were scattered everywhere. As
you said, the ammo boxes are extremely durable. The downside is really for them is weight. That's the thing, like over an aluminum pannier, I'm thinking. But I mean, everybody, talks about trouble sealing aluminum panniers because they're lightweight, they can twist, etc. But the ammo box, it's got a gasket around it and like a heavy wire snap that when you snap it down to close it up. And if you get a good one, which, there's tons, and as you say, there's tons of them out there. I mean, let's face it, these things are used fast and then just tossed aside. They make great containers. They really do. And you can see the attraction.
Yeah. Yeah. And we use them for, we have Jeeps. We use them. We're mounted in the Jeeps, and you use them for storing stuff in there. And, I mean, I buy them by the pallet load, because they're so cheap and just have them sitting around.
Yeah, they're great containers. And you're talking about the large ones too. So I don't know, how many liters are they?
I think they're probably about, at least I'm thinking probably 50 liters.
Yeah. Yeah, quite large. There's different configurations. There's different sizes that you can get, right on down to small ones. I used to have one that I used for carrying some tools in, and I had it for probably 30 years. I think I really did. I think I had it for 30 years. I still have it now, but I actually had tools in it and was using it regularly for 30 years in the vehicle.
Yeah. 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 They are really useful for all kinds of uses. But like you say, the downside is the weight. And I do have aluminum panniers on my other bike. And now on my second gen KLR that I have, I'm running soft luggage on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back to this trip. So for other things in the KLR. So what else is done to it? I mean, do you have auxiliary lights on it or anything like that?
Yeah, I had auxiliary spotlights on it. I had some power ports, and really the only mechanical things that I did was the famous doohickey repair on the first gen KLRs.
Right. The doohickey, which is really it's just a chain tensioner.
That's correct. Yeah. The cam chain balancer shafts.
Okay. So you're loaded up with all your camping gear. Do you have any idea what this whole outfit weighs?
Yeah, I think probably the bike alone wet, a standard KLR, I think is just over 400 pounds. And I think probably with the pannier racks and empty with the extra luggage, that has to weigh at least, 40 pounds, 50 pounds, possibly. And then I had 50 pounds of camping gear. I know that for sure because I weighed it. So, yeah, I was probably riding, the bike itself was probably a little over 500 pounds. And, and then, of course, my weight.
And I think if you're probably adding up in your head, 500 pounds is probably more than that. Because I'm trying to think of what the weight of those ammo cans are. They're pretty weighty. Like they might be like 15 pounds each or something like that.
Yeah, they probably are. So 2 of those, the pannier racks were not that heavy. They were, they were hollow tubing, just like 3/4 inch tubing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it had to be 50 pounds at least, if not a little more with the tank bag and the fairing pack.
Describe how the bike handled when you were loaded up on this trip.
Yeah, the handling of the bike, you could definitely feel it. It felt like you had a passenger on the back. But, on the hard pack stuff, it was never a problem. And, I'd ridden many miles, hard pack dirt roads and really never had any problem. The only problem that I ever had is I had to shorten the kickstand, just because when you got off, just the weight of the boxes would want to try and stand the bike up straight. So, you could never, you really had to plan ahead where you wanted to park it until I took about an inch out of the kickstand height.
No, that's interesting. Okay, so talk about how this ride works. What are you doing? Are you following one another closely? Or do you split up, or how do you do it?
Yeah, we're following each other fairly closely, and sometimes I would lead, and sometimes my friend Ray would lead, and sometimes when we got to the off-road sections that were, quite a bit of off-road, Shane would jump out in front. He was 22 years old at the time, so he liked to twist the throttle. And Ray and I were 50 years old at that time, and we determined that we just don't bounce that well at that age. So we would let Shane kind of run out in front of us. But yeah, mainly on the roads, we would just kind of follow the leader and stop for a break here and there and lunch, and just pretty relaxing stuff.
And talk about where you were heading and what you were aiming for.
Well, the first day we wanted to get across the Mackinac Bridge. And that's basically what we did. That's about 280 miles from home, and running back roads and, just taking your time.
What makes the Mackinac Bridge noteworthy?
Well, it's just kind of, in the amount of days that we had, we figured that would be a good place to get across the bridge the first day.
Is this a fair-sized bridge?
Yeah, the Mackinac Bridge is a 5-mile long bridge, suspension bridge, connects the lower and upper peninsula together.
Okay. Right, so that's why it's noteworthy when you're crossing this. And so you did that the first day?
Yeah, the first day we did get across the bridge, and we made it to a state forest campground just on the northern side in the upper peninsula.
What's the state forest campground look like there?
State forest campgrounds are really nice in Michigan. They're all on water. Either they're on a lake or a river or stream. And all they have is pump water and an outhouse. That's it. It's rough camping. It's pretty inexpensive to camp there. And usually, even in the summer, they are not very full. And sometimes you can camp on state forest land. So sometimes we'll be out in the woods and we'll just find a spot and set up camp there also.
So the next day, you get up from camp. This is the day where you have your incident, correct?
Yes.
So how does this day start off? Take us from the start, sort of.
Yeah. Well, we were in the eastern part of the Upper Peninsula, and we wanted to ride over to a town called Manistee, which is on US 2 highway. It's just a 2-lane highway. And we wanted to get over there and have lunch. And then from there, we would head north on a snowmobile trail called the Haywire Trail. And that takes you from basically the southern side of the Upper Peninsula to the northern side, which is about 60 miles across. And so we wanted to get to Manistee and have lunch and gas up and then hit the trail.
This Haywire Trail, what sort of riding is it? Describe what sort of riding you would expect to have on it.
Well, we kind of expected everything, but it started out it was hard packed gravel, and it's a very nice trail. It's a big snowmobile trail that goes through the woods. Now I think it's more of a, they call it the ORV trail now. But yeah, it's a nice trail, but in the Upper Peninsula, sand is always an issue, and deep sugar sand.
So sand, what else would you get? Would you get mud and rocks? And
you could get mud if the conditions were up for that. If you had some rain, there are some stream crossings. There's a lot of small rocks, nothing large at that point. So mainly gravel, loose gravel, hard packed gravel, and then you could get into some hard packed dirt, and then you could get into the sand.
So sand is the big one that you're expecting. That's going to be the obstacle. If anything's going to be tough, it's going to be the sand.
Yeah. Sand is that's always a tough one.
What did you do to prepare for the sand? Anything?
Not really. Pray.
It's funny when the question's asked like that, put you on the spot, doesn't it?
I know.
But not that you should have. I'm just curious if you actually did something to prepare for it.
Yeah, we really did not prepare for the sand. I mean, we didn't air down completely for the sand, just because, the start of the trail was really nice hard packed gravel. So we thought we were in good shape. And then kind of when you get into the sand, well, you don't really know how long it's going to last. So you try to make it through and, stop if you need to, and which we did plenty. But, we all grew up riding dirt bikes like a lot of people, but none of us were really like professional sand riders, like
right.
A lot of your guests are. And, we don't seek it out, but we deal with it when we get to it. And we've never had any issues before. We've ridden in a lot of sand before, and of course the KLR is definitely not the bike for sand. Even the KLR in bone stock, if it's 400 pounds, that's still too heavy in my opinion. But that's the machines that we had, and we ride everywhere, so. We like to be able to travel at 60 or 65 mile an hour, all day if you have to. And the KLR is great for that.
It is, yeah. So you had not been on this Haywire Trail before?
No.
You obviously made it to the trail and you started riding that?
Yeah, we made it to the trail right out of town. Basically, we had lunch and we gassed up. It was probably around noon. And the trail basically leaves right from town. You can catch the southern end of the trail.
And what's the start like?
The start was nice, hard-packed gravel.
So easy? You buzz out of town, off you go?
Oh, yeah.
What happens?
Yeah, easy. Yeah, super, super easy. So, we're just motoring along, sitting down, riding down this hard-packed gravel. And we all live on gravel roads here, so my house is 3 miles off from pavement, so gravel roads are nothing new. And these were nice, hard packed. And so we were just having a good time, just thinking about trying to make it up to the Pictured Rocks shoreline. That was going to be our camping for night number 2.
What is the Pictured Rocks? Is it pictographs or something?
No, it's just it's a series of high cliff, like if you're on the water and you look back at it, it's pretty high cliffs. It's all wooded, heavily wooded, but it's really beautiful area along the Lake Superior shoreline there.
Yeah, Lake Superior. Wow, you can't go wrong with that for a backdrop.
No, not at all.
So does the riding continue on this gravel? Talk about that.
Yeah, the riding, it stayed gravel for quite a while, and we knew about the halfway point, the paved road that goes north-south kind of crossed over the Haywire Trail. And probably, maybe an hour into the ride is when we started to encounter the sand.
And what does it look like when you say start to encounter? What are you running into?
Well, it starts to be, just kind of light sand on, a dirt pack with sand. Not terrible. And then some pockets of some deeper sand.
And how do you handle that? Are you slowing down for that? Does the whole group slow down, or how do you handle the sand when you come to it?
We all slowed down except Shane, the 22-year-old. He was gone.
Right. Go figure.
Right. Yeah. He had no worries, so he was out front at that point, and he was just motoring along, and he would stop and wait for us. And my friend Ray was in front of me, and our other friend Chuck was behind me. And so we're riding in the sand, and for the most part, it's not bad. We would stand up and handle it, no problem. And, I kept trying to turn around and look back to see if Chuck was okay. Chuck had just had back surgery not long before this ride, so I was a little concerned about him. So we just kind of kept going, and the sand started getting deeper, and we would stop. And we're looking at the map thinking, do we turn around and go back towards town, or do we try to make it where this Highway 94, I believe it is, crossed over?
So at this point, you're having trouble with the sand, I'm gathering. Like it's getting to be quite a bit.
Yeah, it's starting to get, there were times where we were just kind of doing the dog paddle thing. But for the most part, we were trying to keep our speed up, which everybody says, you got to go faster. And I'm thinking, well, at some point, the faster you go, the harder the landing's going to be.
Right.
But yeah, so yeah, we were standing up. Occasionally, I would sit down just to take a quick glance in my mirrors to see if Chuck was back there and how he was doing. But then I'd stand right back up again.
Is anybody dropping their bike?
No one has dropped yet. No.
So everything's looking okay, but the conditions are getting tough. Just before we go any further, I'm curious how you manage the group. Like, because you're saying you're having to sit down to look back to see your buddy Chuck, who's behind you. Do you have some sort of system for when somebody stops, how you signal the rest, or when the person in front stops? Or do they wait for the group to catch up or anything like that?
Yeah, pretty much the lead person would just usually stop, and that was Shane. He would get way out in front of us. He would stop. We'd catch up to him. We'd all stop and just kind of complain about the sand a little bit and make sure everybody's doing okay. And then we just get going again, so that was kind of an accordion style riding.
And what happens next?
Well, we're still dealing with the sand. And so I see Ray, he's up in front of me, not terribly far, but probably a few 100 feet. And he's kind of in dog paddle mode. So I know he's kind of in some deeper sand. So I was still doing okay. And then I sat down for just a split second to look at Chuck again. And my front wheel hit a hole. And the front tire washed out. Everybody knows how fast this can happen. So I instinctively put my right foot down and just nailed the throttle wide open. Well, the front end washed out and down I went.
every rider should be aware of double take mirror. Now, I don't understand how the manufacturers haven't approached them and asked them to give them the mirrors for their stock bikes. The only reason I can come up with that they haven't is because if they put that on a stock motorcycle, they'd never sell another mirror through their parts department. Because if you've broken your stock mirror, which happens, all you have to do is drop your bike. You know how expensive they are to replace, but also how brittle they are. I mean, they're just so easy to break. So that leaves you with a broken mirror for the rest of your ride, which is dangerous, but it also leaves you with an expensive repair. Double take mirrors are guaranteed for life. That's how well they build these things. They guarantee them for life. You break it, they replace it. It's as simple as that. And now they've got a complete new redesign. Double take now uses a proprietary uncrushable ball mount and adjuster arm, which means the toughest mirror in the world for motorcyclists just got tougher and more versatile. They've got different shapes to suit your style, and they've retained all the great things about the original double take mirror, which I've been running on my bike for years. And man, I have beat mine terribly, not on purpose, but mine have really taken a beating, whacked by trees and slammed to the ground, dropped in rivers. I've never broken a double take mirror, not once. Aside from that, they're infinitely adjustable, super easy, especially this new one they've got, this new design, super easy to do with your gloves on. They'll give you a better view than your stock mirrors, and they're easy to fold down or adjust. I mean, they are just so far superior over a stock mirror, not to mention the money they will save you when you break your stock mirrors. Have a look at the new design for Double Take Mirror at doubleTakeMirror.com. And when you're dealing with them, throw in there that you heard them here on Adventure Rider Radio. doubleTakeMirror.com. I get excited this time of year because this is when we start to hear about Overland Expo. Overland Expo SoCal, March 15th and 16th, 2025 at the OC Fair and Event Center in Costa Mesa, California. Get outfitted, get trained, and get inspired to explore the world at Overland Expo SoCal. This is the world's premier event for overland adventure enthusiasts of all kinds. At this one, over 250 top-tier vendors. You can outfit your motorcycle, any rig you want, and just see so many possibilities. You can get inspired with authors, filmmakers, creators, and world travelers that are hosting workshops and classes, storytelling sessions. It's just incredible to be there and see the people and talk with the people that are doing the things that you may love to do or maybe just you're interested in. Connect with fellow explorers at their legendary happy hour. Just an incredible setup there. Now look, plan ahead. Get your tickets at overlandexpo.com. That's Overland Expo SoCal, March 15th and 16th, 2025, the OC Fair and Event Center in Costa Mesa, California. Anytime you're dealing with them, throw in there that you heard them here on Adventure Rider Radio. Overlandexpo.com. So when you say you put your right foot down, you're trying to dab is what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm trying to straighten the bike out, and giving it all the throttle it had.
And how fast?
I was not going fast at all. I was probably going, maybe 15 mile an hour, not fast enough, obviously.
So you dab, you said the front wheel washed out, and what happened? Well,
I was still straddling the bike. My right leg was under the bike. The throttle was still wide open throttle when I was on the ground. So I hit the kill switch, and then Chuck, he kind of caught up to me, and he stopped, he got off, and he was okay. I was under the bike. I was trying to push the bike off from me, but, the thing fully loaded was pretty heavy. And I could kind of feel something in my leg. And I did hear some audible noises when the crash happened that I figured something happened. But I wasn't in any real pain. So Chuck came and he helped lift the bike off. And then, then we both saw my foot was basically pointed the wrong direction. It was about 190 degrees rotated backwards.
Audible noises, describe those.
Yeah, it was like a 2x4 snap, something like that.
Really loud.
Yeah, it wasn't like super loud, but I heard like a snap or like a stick break or something,
Right. And when you see your foot pointing backwards, are you in denial?
Uh, no,
Like,
I wasn't in denial.
You didn't, because I think you'd have a tendency to look at that thinking, no, it can't be.
I know. Yeah, we've had so many trips, and we've all been on the ground multiple times. But this one, yeah, when I saw my foot, and I think Chuck and I, yeah, neither one of us really wanted to say anything. But once, he helped me, I stood up on my left leg, and the bike's on the kickstand, so I'm hanging onto the top, the tour box on the trunk. And I thought, well, we got my foot pointed the right direction. And I thought, well, I'll just try to stand on it and see what it feels like. Well, it was completely disconnected. There was like it felt like you were standing on a dowel, a wooden dowel.
Isn't that kind of denial? I mean, here, point my foot in the right direction. I'll see if it still works.
Well, I think so, because my buddy Ray, he finally turned around. He saw us behind him, and he came back, and, we're all like, I think he was thinking maybe we could just rub some dirt on it or something. It'd be okay. Yeah, but that wasn't going to happen.
No, I mean, and of course it's funny in hindsight because, you're healed now and everything's fine. But,
I know, yeah.
Do you remember what you felt at the time, though? Like what you actually felt inside as you're realizing what predicament you're in?
Yeah, I really, at the time, I felt fine, but I'm thinking, right away, your mind's going, okay, what do we do next? How do we get out of here?
Yeah.
We're cell phones. We all had cell phones, but, that technology was pretty new at the time. And in that part of the Upper Peninsula, there is zero cell phone signal.
Mm.
So I sat down, and, Shane finally came back to us. So we're all four of us are there. I sat down, and Chuck, being that he just had back surgery, he had these 500 milligram ibuprofen that he was eating like candy. So I took one of those, and then we put my foot on my helmet, and we had some electrical tape. And so we thought, we left my boot on and put my pant leg over the boot and just kind of taped the whole works together so my foot wouldn't, flop around. And that's when, Ray decided he's got to go somewhere to try to get a cell signal.
How many riders are there right there?
There's four of us at that point.
There's four of you. One rider is going to go with his cell phone and try to get a cell signal.
Yeah, Ray kept riding north. We knew that the Highway 94, now we were getting closer to that, which is a paved road. It's just a 2-lane road. So he rode up to that road. There was still no cell signal there. So he started to ride south back towards town. We're about in the middle of the Upper Peninsula now. So it's about 30 miles back to town.
Okay, so hang on right there. So while he's up there doing that, while he's trying to get the cell signal, what's happening with you back at the site?
Well, I was, at that point, I think I was getting a little shocky because I was starting to, get cold and sweating at the same time. But, Chuck was there, Shane was there, and we were just trying to, keep our mind off from what was going on. But, and as long as I was just sitting down, I had my jacket on and had my foot elevated on my helmet, which is about as far as I could get it up there. And we were just kind of shooting a breeze at that point, and everybody was, kind of saying how bad the sand got all of a sudden, but, that wasn't going to fix my foot.
So as far as the first aid situation, though, you're sitting there, you're starting to experience shock. Your mouth's probably getting pasty and feeling thirsty. And were you starting to feel dizzy or losing consciousness at all or anything like that?
No, none of that. But yeah, like you say, getting, a little bit dizzy feeling. So I just sat there and had a bottle of water, So just sat and drank water, and that only, that shocky feel did not last long, at all. And so I was back to feeling normal, and I was in no pain at all. That was a surprising part for the amount of damage that had happened.
Okay, so you sent one rider, Ray. You sent him ahead to get help, but the trail was already real sandy, and this is why you ended up in this position. Was there concern that he may not make it to the road?
Well, he was. Yeah, I wasn't too concerned about him. Because he was going slow, and I think he was dog paddling through that deeper sand section there, and then. I think the sand, it got better farther up towards the highway. So, yeah, I wasn't too concerned about him getting out of there, to be honest.
But you didn't know the sand got better, though. You wouldn't really know the conditions from there to the highway.
No, I didn't know.
You just knew it was in close proximity.
Yes, yeah.
Right. So was there any talk of when you're waiting for Ray to go and potentially get help? Is there any talk about the fact that you could be there for a while?
Yeah, we kind of assumed we would be there for a while, just kind of where we were, But I knew that, there wasn't any bones sticking out anywhere, so I felt good about that. Wasn't any bleeding. And I wasn't in any pain, so that part of it really didn't concern me too much.
Okay, so let's just jump back to Ray. Ray is up the highway. He finally gets to a spot where he can call 911. Talk about that.
Yeah, so he calls 911. He gets through. He's talking to the 911 operator, and the signal dropped out. So he gets disconnected.
While he's talking to them.
Yes.
Oh no.
So he fires a bike back up, and he continues south, and he stopped again, and he calls back, and he got the same 911 operator, which isn't surprising. I mean, it's kind of a remote area up there. And so the operator, he says, "Hey, my buddy just crashed. We're out in the woods, and he crashed on a trail." So the operator said, "Well, what's the address?" Well, Ray's like, "I don't know what the address is. We're in the middle of the Upper Peninsula on a trail, snowmobile trail." So I think at that point he started riding again south, and he came upon a house that looked to be abandoned, but it had a mailbox out on the road with an address there. So he was able to give that address to the 911 operator, and she said, "Okay, yeah, that's a good address." She said, "Stay right there." And so he stayed there, and while he was sitting there, a guy drives up in some old clapped out Chevrolet Lumina with, it was a tan car with a purple hood and a, silver door on one side and a yellow door on the other side. He stops, and he was a paramedic. And he said, "Hey, he says, I heard on the scanner, I heard this call." And so Ray said, he told the situation and where I was. And the paramedic said, "Yeah, I know exactly where that is." So he drove his car north on the highway up to where the trail crossed the highway, came south, and here comes this car pulling up to where we were all sitting on this snowmobile trail.
Do you know if Ray had any sort of question on whether this guy really was a paramedic? I mean, let's face it, the guy pulls up in a vehicle like that and says, "Hey, I just heard on the scanner."
Right. Yeah, I think at that time it was pretty much anybody that could come out there. You would just go ahead and welcome them. Come on out. See if you can give us a hand.
Something's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
this guy arrives. What happens then? You see the vehicle pull up. What do you think when you see the vehicle pull up?
Well, I thought, I didn't know. I certainly didn't think the guy was a paramedic, but he got out, and he had on a shirt, and that I think had some paramedic service or something insignia on it. And anyway, the guy comes up and, he's like, he says, yeah, he says, I saw your buddy out on the road and got back here. He says, we come back here all the time in the winter to get snowmobilers that, go off the trail and hit trees and whatever. But he says, we don't come back here. We don't come back here in the summer very often at all. So he's there. And so he assesses the damage and obviously my ankle was broken. And, so he gets an ice pack of, I think is what he had there, or something that they break open. And so he took all the tape off, took my boot off, cut my pant leg up, and he applied this ice pack to it. And
the boot coming off, that was all fine for you?
Yeah, that was okay. At that point, the swelling wasn't terrible yet. So he applies that ice, and he was just basically doing that. And at the same time, right about at that time, a four-wheeler pulls up, and it's a DNR officer. So this guy, he just kind of came out of nowhere, but maybe he heard the call also. But so he was...
DNR is Department of Natural Resources.
Yeah, yep. So he was on a quad, a four-wheeler, and it's possible that they patrol that area just to make sure everybody has the correct trail permits and that sort of thing. Which we had an ORV sticker, which is the off-road vehicle sticker. And then we were licensed vehicles. So we thought that was all that we needed. Well, apparently we also needed an additional trail permit, which we did not have. We did not know that at all. And
right.
so this guy's, he's just kind of hovering at that point. And out on the road at that time, an ambulance comes up and meets Ray there. And Ray tells him the same thing, where I'm at. The ambulance people, they knew where it was too.
So this is so regular for the wintertime. They know the trail.
Yeah.
They just don't go to it in the summertime. But they're willing to take an ambulance down a trail?
Yeah, it was, the trail, you could get a vehicle down, say, definitely a Jeep, something like that. So it was a big enough trail for that. It was hard to turn around, but an ambulance, they came back. And then the third vehicle to meet Ray out on the road was the state police, Michigan State Police. So Ray told him that, and so he rode back to the trail with the police officer following him. And then he parked his bike at the trail where it met the highway, and then he hopped in with the cop, and they drove back to the scene also. So now there's a state police officer there, a DNR officer, and then there was the initial paramedic, and then the ambulance had another paramedic, and I think the guy that was in the ambulance also was a county sheriff, because he had a gun, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know many ambulance drivers that wear a gun, So
you get some rowdy calls.
Yeah, he had a uniform on, and he had a sidearm. So, but he was there helping, and everybody was just really good. The DNR guy, now he's starting to chime in about that we were lacking this trail permit, and he just kind of kept going on and on and on about it, which I get. We were missing one trail sticker. And then finally, I think the state police officer, the woman, she told him, I think, to just kind of put it to rest. And, the guy's here with an injury, and, and then so he finally just kind of rode off and left the scene. So
what did he want to do? He wanted you to buy a permit or pay a ticket, or what was he expecting at that point?
I don't know I think he was probably maybe thinking about giving us a citation, for that issue. I don't know, but the state police officer kind of intervened and, said, now's not the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, they, once everybody got there and the ambulance got there, and then they put an air cast on my right leg and got me loaded up into the ambulance. Took a little bit of doing, but they got the thing turned around. I'm in the back, and I could tell they were turning around, looking out the back window, and then they stopped, and the sheriff opened the door, and he threw the mud flap in off the ambulance. Great big mud flap on the back, and they broke it off, I guess, trying to get turned around. And I asked him if I had to pay for that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah,
That's going to go on your bill.
No, he said that one's on the house. So, but anyway, the ambulance got up to the highway, and then they turned their sirens on, and now we're heading back to Manistee, the town, and full sirens. And I'm thinking, boy, this seems like a big production.
Seems like a lot going on.
Right. Yeah. I didn't think, it was just me. And I'm thinking, what the heck, got the sirens on for? But
I think most of us understand it's easier to keep warm than it is to get warm after you've been cold. I mean, think of any time you've got cold feet or cold hands for that matter, and try and warm them up. You get off the bike, you go inside somewhere, maybe stop for lunch, you try and warm them up. You never get them fully warmed up. It just takes so long to get them warmed up. But then your clothes are cold, your boots are cold, you get back on the bike, and pretty soon you're cold again. So you got to start out with the proper gear to begin with. And when it comes to feet, the absolute best thing you can do for your feet is have a top-notch sock. And really the best socks that I've ever tried. And I've done tons of outdoor stuff my entire life. I've tried all kinds of gear. The best socks I've ever tried are Pearlie's Possum socks. Pearlie's makes their socks with a blend of merino wool and possum fur. This blend is so incredible. But first of all, they're natural fibers, which means that they have a thing called lanolin in them. And what lanolin does basically is it stops mold and mildew from starting to grow, which is the problem with all your synthetic stuff. Mold, mildew, that's what makes them stink so bad when they get wet after they've been wet for a while. With Pearlie's Possum socks, those natural fibers actually stop mold and mildew from growing. So they just don't stink. And I mean, I'm not saying you can wear them forever, but I've worn them, let's just say, past their due date. And I've never had Pearlie's stink at all. And that's inside my riding boots. These are the best cold weather socks I've ever tried. And everyone who's emailed me about them, who's bought these socks, say the same thing. They're blown away by them. I love the tall socks in my boots because the tall socks go all the way up to the top of my boot. They're the most comfortable and warm sock, like I say, I've ever tried. It is the official sock of Adventure Rider Radio because I made it that way because I got so excited about them. So anyway, these are my favorite socks. I absolutely love them. PearliesPossumSocks.com is a website. Anytime you're dealing with them, throw in there that you heard them here on Adventure Rider Radio. These are the best socks you will ever own. PearliesPossumSocks.com. If you want to add to your skill level, particularly when you're riding off-road, look at IMS Products foot pegs. IMS has a full line of adventure motorcycle foot pegs that will actually change your ride. They did it for me. By putting those pegs on, the connection, the leverage, the handling, the enhanced ability that I have was markedly different. Just an incredible payoff. IMSproducts.com is the website. Anytime you're dealing with them, throw in there that you heard them here on Adventure Rider Radio. IMSproducts.com.
So that's where I went right out of the ambulance into the ER there. Small little hospital, small there, and had what I needed at the time. So,
and what did they do for you?
They basically looked at, obviously did a visual inspection and cut my pant leg off. Then they did x-rays. They sent the x-rays to a larger hospital in a different part of the Upper Peninsula. And apparently an orthopedic person looked at the x-rays and said, yeah, it needs to be surgically repaired. So what had wound up happening is I broke my ankle kind of on both sides. And then I also broke my leg the fibula, the outer bone, that broke also. Maybe about 8 inches, 10 inches from my ankle up. And they call that a spiral fracture. With my foot turning all around like it did, it just, stuff just started breaking, as it went upstream.
And it tends to make a bit of a mess of the bone when it breaks.
Yeah, it was called a green stick spiral fracture. And then the fact that my ankle also was broke on both sides. So my foot was just kind of, it was kind of hanging on there with the, skin and your other tendons and so on. But I did kind of hyperextend my Achilles tendon. I think some of the tendons that go on the top of your foot got torn. It was a bit of damage in there for sure. So then basically they had me flip over on my stomach. And at that time, they wanted me to bend my leg up, so it was pointing up. Well, I had to have them hold on my foot because my foot was just flopping all around. And so they did that, and then they got that to where my leg was pointing up, and then they basically cleaned everything up, and then they start building a hard cast from there. So they put a hard cast on my ankle and my lower leg, and then, that was it. I mean, they said, you need to have surgery, but we can't do the surgery here. And I said, well, I don't plan on having it done here.
So they patched you up with all your broken bits into a hard case, and then said, go take it and get yourself fixed somewhere.
Yeah, pretty much. I said, I'm about 400 miles from home, so I'm trying to call my wife at the time when I'm basically out of the ER. She was at a convention locally here, but she obviously didn't hear her phone for a while. So the nurse at the hospital, it's just a lot of local yokels up there. And she said, well, I'll have my boyfriend come and he can take you to a hotel, a little motel. And I said, that'd be great. And about at that time, Chuck, one of our riders, we said, Chuck, you can head home if you want. So his sister lived about halfway home, about 200 miles away. So he was going to ride to his sister's house, which he did. He did text us later in the evening. It was dark, and he said that he arrived there, no problem. So Shane and Ray and I at the hospital. Well, at that time, Shane and Ray, they rode back to the accident site because my bike was still back there on the trail. So they rode back. One of them rode my bike back into town. This was all while I was in the ER. And then they had to ride back again to get Ray's bike, which was still up there. So now there's 3 riders left, and now all 3 bikes are at the hospital. So we're at the hospital now in this small town, Manistee, Michigan. And so then the nurse, got a hold of her boyfriend. Well, it turns out he was the county sheriff or whatever, the guy that was out there on the trail helping me.
He's the guy with the sidearm.
He's the guy with the gun, yeah.
Right.
And so he pulls up in his cop car, and, I hop in, and Ray and Shane follow. My bike's still at the hospital. They ride, it's just a few miles from the hospital, and they take us to a motel. I come in on crutches, and, it's like, hey, do you have a room at least, And they had a room. Ray and Shane went back to the hospital, got my bike, brought it back to the hotel. And so there we were at the hotel, late afternoon. And I finally got a hold of my wife, and Ray got a hold of his wife, which our wives are very good friends. And so they kind of cooked up a plan where they were going to come up and get me the next day, which they left actually that day. And they took one of their pickups, and they drove up to my sister's house, which is in the tip of the lower peninsula, to kind of break the trip up a little bit. So they got there around midnight and stayed at my sister's house. They left the next morning and got up to the hotel where we were at probably 10 o'clock in the morning. At that time, we got the bike into the truck, and I was just a spectator at this point.
Standing with your cast of bones, broken bits that you have to get fixed still.
All the broken bits and pieces were all sitting inside the cast there. And Shane and Ray, they decided to continue on their journey, so they rode south. And then my wife and Ray's wife, Peggy, and their other son, Jesse, we all just drove home and got me home. And Ray brought my bike over a few days later.
And of course, you went to the hospital to get these bits put back together.
Yeah. I went to the hospital, and then they told me I had to wait about 2 weeks for the swelling to go down before they could do surgery.
Oh, wow.
And
because I guess because of the time lag is swollen.
Yeah, it's swollen pretty big now. And I was a little concerned. I thought, I'm not a medical person. I thought, well, aren't the bones going to start healing by then? And they said, no, don't worry about that. So, 2 weeks later, fortunately, we have one of the best hospitals in the world here, University of Michigan Hospital. And they did surgery, and they put a plate from my ankle up the side of my leg, and I think about 11 screws in there holding everything together.
Wow, that is quite the ordeal. And it's interesting because I think when you first had mentioned this to me, you said you're 400 miles from home. You're not like on some big round the world trip, but it's incredible how it doesn't take that far away to become a whole logistical nightmare. Because when you're out riding with a group like that, it only takes one person to have an issue, and all of a sudden you've got this logistical problem. You've got a motorcycle and a bunch of gear, and it just becomes such a big issue. I mean, it's not life-threatening, but it's certainly an issue to deal with, that motorcycle.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I listen to your show forever, and I hear the stories. We hear all the stories of the people out in the African bush, and, this is nothing compared to what they've gone through, but yeah, like you say, it's still a problem if you're out there and you're a ways from home. And like you say, now you got a dead motorcycle that it was still certainly roadworthy. Nothing happened to the bike, but you just have all that extra stuff to take care of, all the logistics, like you say. But
well, because it's Deep Trouble, of course, we want to go back over this and talk about what happened and what things we can learn from your experience with this. The first thing I want to just talk about before we go right back to the start was the break in your foot, this twisting of the foot, and the green stick break, which I always think is a disgusting term, because you can think about it. If you think of breaking a green stick, it doesn't break like a snapped off, like an old stick. It splinters and it's a very messy break.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, we've heard people say who are medical professionals on our show that the problem is with those bits when they start sticking, when they're sticking around inside underneath your skin, they can touch arteries and they can cut arteries because they're sharp bones, etc. So it can be a real problem. I mean, luckily, you didn't run into any issue with it, but any sort of break like that always has a potential for something bad, something worse to happen, for the injury to become, maybe a dangerous situation.
Right. And that's where the sirens come in, or they knew, obviously they knew more than I did, what probably could go sideways. Yep. And they wanted to get me there as soon as they could.
They want to make sure there's not all of a sudden some internal bleeding or maybe has been, that hasn't been quite noticeable, although I know they're checking for that. But okay, so let's go back. You're riding your KLR. You're into the deep sand. You said that you put your foot out. Now, I know you weren't going very fast, and we dab. We all do this, right? I mean, you learn to dab, to do a quick little dab to maybe prevent the bike from going over. But I don't know, when you, in hindsight now, what do you think about your procedure there, your dab?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I would have probably just tried to stop maybe, because we had been stopping all along. And, that's probably what I should have done, but it happened so fast with the front wheel washing out that, there was no stopping. I mean, I stopped all right, but not in the way that I'd planned to.
Yeah.
And so it was just, just instinct, putting my foot down, like you say, the dab, and just nailing the throttle, because typically that'll, straighten the bike out. But
right. But if it doesn't
not
work,
this time.
if it doesn't work, your foot is down on the ground. But also when we're riding off road, one of the problems with a dab is that you don't know really what you're stepping on. I mean, whether it's a root sticking out or a rock is there, you have no idea what you're putting your foot down into. So I know like Clinton Smout, when he talks about this, he teaches riders to lift their leg up rather than do the dab. Lift your leg up to get out from underneath the bike, right? So the bike doesn't land on you or you don't get caught up in it. Whereas, I mean, we had another, Bill Dragout, he recounted his ride up a hill where his toe got caught on I think it was a root or a rock or something like that, and did the same break as what you've got right there. I mean, and that's the feet on the peg. So we don't know what's on the ground, right? You don't know what your foot's going to contact. And I'm thinking with that, might it have been better? I mean, we know it would have been because we know what happened, but to have just hiked your foot up off that peg in the chance that it may be going down and forget a dab, because I know there's some instructors that will say, don't dab. It's like certainly at any speed. When you're doing walking speed, a dab can work. But when you're going any sort of speed at all on an adventure bike, the bike is, I mean, you said it was 500 pounds plus you. I mean, you could be talking, 800 pounds or something if it does go down on you, which it didn't. You didn't necessarily land on it, did it?
Yeah, the ammo box did kind of land on my leg, yes.
The ammo box.
Yeah, the old ammo box, yeah.
So we talked about the ammo box and how great it was, and hard panniers have so many advantages. They really do. But one disadvantage is, depending on where your box is mounted, I guess anything hard, of course, is going to be a problem for us, but it will depend on the mounting of it. I think with these ammo boxes, they mount fairly low, don't they?
Yeah, they were mounted fairly low. They were far enough back. But the issue was when I did dab, when I was going down, my foot dug into the sand, and basically I think the whole works rotated around my foot. So as the inertia was going forward and down, my foot was turning and my leg was going backwards, because it was stuck in the sand. And then when the bike did come down, the ammo box did land on my leg. Right. Now, I don't think the ammo box broke my leg portion just because of the green stick fracture of it.
Meaning that it twisted around.
It was all the twisting motion that broke everything. Now, it could have played a role in part of my ankle brake because the ankle brake was on both sides, on the inner and the outer. Mm-hmm. And so that all had to get screwed back together. But hard panniers, I've got them on my road bike, and they're wonderful for traveling. They're aluminum panniers on that bike, but it's an issue off road for sure.
So what do you use now? You use soft panniers.
I have soft panniers on my KLR. Yeah,
right. As a direct result of that.
Yes.
Right. The idea that your toe turned backwards, your foot turned backwards and did the green stick break, the rotational break of your leg, that tells you that it was probably too fast, or at least certainly too long to put your foot down, or it got caught on something. So I think that's a real big thing, and I really think that we have to practice, and I've done it too. There are times when the bike's going down where you just got to think about protecting yourself. But if we just back up even one step from that, I did have something that I noticed there. You said you had to keep sitting down to look back. Why didn't you just use your mirrors to check on Chuck, who was behind you?
Well, I would try to look in my mirrors, but I was standing up and I couldn't quite see, the way that the mirrors were pointed. They were fine for sitting down, but once I was standing, I was, too far above the mirrors to even try to crouch down to look in the mirrors. And I would try to turn around, and I could at certain times I could turn around and see them, but that seemed to be more of an accident waiting than to sit down, when I was doing it. Because when I would try to turn my torso around or my head around, then I feel like maybe I'm starting to tweak the bars a little bit, and so I would just sit down for a split second to just look in the mirror real quick, and yep, Chuck's back there, and he's struggling just like the rest of us are.
I see. And one thing that I do when I'm riding for that sort of thing is I put one mirror adjusted for standing and one for sitting. I've got these double take mirrors, which are so easy to adjust. They've got like a little ball and soccer thing on them. But so I just set them up like that. And that way I've got a mirror no matter what. I'm not having to adjust my riding because, of course, you don't want to sit down if you're in an area where you're standing for obvious reasons for control. So that might be something that you could that you could look at.
Yeah. Well, and that certainly is a good idea for sure.
We talked about managing the group. Managing the group's always a tough one, because if somebody does fall off in the back and you guys all wait when you stop somewhere, and then the person doesn't show up, and then you've got to ride back to see what they're doing, and it turns out they just stopped because they had to go to the washroom or something. I mean, it's always a problem. And I guess, do you use comms now?
Yes. Yeah. Now we all use comms.
It makes it a lot of fun too. I know some people don't like using them. I find them fun, to be able to chat as you go along. It sort of adds to it. You did say when you went down, the throttle was wide open, probably because your hand was there. Maybe the throttle got jammed in the sand, but you used your kill switch. And I think that's a key point. So this is why Clinton Smout always teaches people to shut off their bike with their kill switch rather than reaching for their ignition, because the kill switch is right there on your handlebar. And because you had it programmed, you were able to just quickly kill the bike, which could save your engine, but it also could save somebody getting hurt. You've got a wheel possibly spinning there, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really good that you had yourself, programmed to just hit that kill switch.
Yeah. And I've done that, before, other times going down in the sand when, without an incident. And like you say, it's so hard to train your brain, keep your feet on the pegs, you tell yourself that 100 times. But, I need to probably take a class from Clinton, but I'm afraid that I'd have him start telling me all of his stories and I'd just be laughing the whole time,
Yeah. Well, like you said, about keeping the speed up, you said, in sand, everybody always says, keep the speed up, but it's actually keeping the rear wheel spinning. Right? I mean, you're speed up to some degree, but I'm no sand expert. Oh, I like sand. I find it fun. I like the challenge of it. But it's I know the type of trail you're talking about, where you're riding along and all of a sudden you come to these sand patches. It's not like ideal training sand. You often have a berm in the middle, particularly if ATVs have been going down it. You'll have berms in the middle, etc. And it can just keep throwing you off. But I was thinking about the weight of your bike. I mean, you've got a lot loaded on your bike, and sand is just like much worse with a load. Do you run with less of a load now? Has it changed the way you pack at all?
Yeah, I pack lighter now. But on our KLR rides now, we mainly utilize the sidecars for that. But yeah, as far as the camping gear, I'm pretty minimalistic with what I take. But the bottom line is wrong tool for the job. I need to have like a 200 or something to go practice in the sand. And possibly if you wanted to do those kind of rides, definitely have something, 350 or a 300, somewhere in that size bike, to where, you just don't have the weight. The KLR is just not a sand bike, not for my riding skills in the sand.
Mm-hmm. And it's quite a bit to lift up. I mean, for some people, like for, I think it was Shane, 22 at that time, and for him, it's probably no problem at all. He can probably pick it up and handle it no problem in the sand. Like you say, it depends on your skill level, and I think physical fitness as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm fairly fit. I have no problem picking that bike up at all. I just the sand, and especially after that accident, even if I'm riding down these dirt roads where I live and they're freshly graded, that is not fun either. I mean, the gravel can be 4 or 5 inches thick of loose gravel. And so I've encountered that many times, and I just stand up on the pegs and I'm going a lot faster. And I'm doing all the stuff that they say to do, and I do get home, but boy, I'm in a cold sweat when I reach home.
What about on that trip? What boots were you wearing? Were they riding boots?
No, that was a problem too. They were just, basically your standard work boot type boot,
Right.
Steel-toed work boots. And, I had jeans on, which was not a problem at that time. And I had an adventure jacket on. I always wear a full face helmet. And of course, nowadays, I have the correct boots. I have adventure pants with all the body armor. I have my helmet, and gloves and, the helmet comms, and that's where I listen to all your shows. So, live and learn, but
of course, yeah.
Yeah, definitely wrong boots. And I'm not sure if I had motocross boots on, would I have been injury free? I don't know,
Mm-hmm. Well, the one thing about an adventure boot or a motocross boot is it is one heavy chunk of protection on your feet. It really is. Like right. Your feet do feel, I don't want to say invincible, but man, does it feel like you're protected when you're wearing them.
Yeah, and I have those now, and I have that feeling when I'm riding for sure. But yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have them back then.
Right. So first aid, out of the group, was anyone trained in first aid?
I think maybe Chuck might have. He probably had the most first aid training. He was an ex-motocross rider. Really, we all have first aid kits, but, I don't know what would have happened if there was a bone sticking out, if it was a compound fracture, I don't know what would have happened then. That would have been a whole different ball game, because I sat there on the trail for at least an hour, if not longer. But yeah, Chuck, he knew, give me the big horse pill, ibuprofen, to help maybe with the swelling, and elevate my leg and tape the thing kind of all together so it's not this wobble gear hanging out there.
Right. Yeah, and with taping it together or immobilizing the broken bit for comfort, of course, but it can help with the swelling, and it can also try and prevent any sort of damage that we were talking about earlier, where you've got your arteries, etc., in there with a bunch of sharp broken bones. So if you immobilize it, there's less chance of something like that happening after the fact.
Yeah.
But so now, though, have you guys upgraded, or have you done anything with first aid?
Not really. We still all carry first aid kits. We, obviously we have, better phones, but we still, because we all ride together, in which this summer I might, I still haven't run one of those, the spot or press the button, type units. But, I'm looking into that, because I do ride by myself from time to time, but not, if I'm by myself, I don't get off the grid, so to speak. I'm somewhere where somebody's going to see you, or, something like that. But yeah, with the first aid training, I hate to say it, but I'm not sure how good I would be, even if I was trained. If I came upon an accident scene, I could certainly try to give somebody some assistance, but I don't know how good I would be at it.
Well, it's kind of, when you carry a first aid kit, though, without any first aid training, it's kind of like carrying a toolbox without knowing how to fix something, in a way, right? Like, you can do some things. Right. I know you can handle the minor things, like, a Band-Aid or whatever. They're the minor things that on a short trip really mean nothing. A chance of infection on a longer trip, of course, could be a problem. So, it's kind of like carrying all those tools and really not having a clue how to fix something. Whereas taking a first aid course, I think what sort of empowers you in a way, like it gives you some knowledge, and it makes you feel like at least that you know what to do. Because nothing, I think, is worse than that situation. Because I noticed that when you were waiting, you said everyone was sort of talking about the about the sand, how bad it was, etc. And you said there with your foot taped up, and you were fine. But with some first aid training, somebody could have known to monitor you, to watch for signs of shock, and just make sure that something doesn't turn into something worse that could have been handled with some basic training. So I don't know, first aid training, I think is really well worth it for us motorcyclists. And I'm not chastising you at all. I'm just saying, like, in general sense.
No, I agree, and that's something that that I probably need to look into, and just like you say, for anything, even around the house,
Yeah.
something happens.
Oh, I mean, if it was
Yeah.
a chest puncture or something like that, where you punctured a lung, it'd be something like you need to deal with that, and you may not have time to wait. It sounds like you got help fairly fast, but you could have been in a situation where you wouldn't have had it been at night, or if the situations had changed at all.
Right.
If it was raining out, for instance, and the trail was muddy, if the trail was a little bit worse at the end and they couldn't come in, or they wouldn't come in.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I'd probably still be out there.
That's right. Maybe a different story we'd be talking about. But one of the other things I was thinking of is you sent one rider out. Was there any concern, or thinking about it in hindsight, of sending only one rider out in an unknown trail? You know roughly the distance, but you really don't know how bad that trail is, to go out and get help. I wonder if it would have made more sense to send two riders out.
Yeah, it probably would have been better to send two riders, thinking about it now. Probably Ray and his son Shane. If Shane would have gone with them, that would have been certainly better.
Because when you get in a tough situation, people get stressed. And I can imagine the rider going out, as I think it was Ray that went out, as Ray is riding out there, he's got that pressure of, hey, my friend is hurt right now, and I'm not really sure how bad it is, because he doesn't have first aid training, or may not have much of it. And either way, you may not know, right? So he's feeling the pressure to get out there. And the chance of him going down, I think, would be elevated, of him having an issue if something went wrong. Whereas if there was two of them, they might be better off. So, I mean, in hindsight, it's always easy to look at this stuff. And of course, that's why we're doing it.
Well, yeah. And remember, he was the guy that thought I should maybe just rub some dirt on it. We keep going.
I think it'll be okay. Let me twist it around in the right direction. Now try. Give it a go now.
Right. Can't you just put your foot on the peg?
Right.
Let's go.
It's crazy.
I know. I mean, we laugh about that all the time, but it's like, yeah, we should have probably sent out his son with him, and then just left one person with me. That would have been fine.
Also, having a bit of a plan, so where you say, okay, well, I'm going to go out, I'm going to call, and I'm going to get back to you, or something like that. And of course, now we have satellite communicators, which make it a lot easier. But even if you had a GPS, he should have left, in my mind, with knowing your location, because if the trail had been more convoluted, and maybe you knew it wasn't, but if it was more convoluted and you had to make a couple of turns going out, he may not be able to find you, or he may have trouble finding you, to get you help. So it's important, if you're going to go for help, I think, to know where you are. Where is the help required? And nothing is better than a GPS, so you can get your, latitude, longitude, or UTM coordinates. You mark it before you go, and then you can go out, and once you get a hold of help, you can say, okay, this is where they are. Now, how do we get there? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's something that we're aware of now. Even when we're riding, we kind of know that type of stuff, where we're at. I mean, we've pinned locations just for other things, pin locations where if we want to come back to something that you probably wouldn't find again. Yeah. I mean, but yeah, I'm looking into the satellite base. I know on your show you've talked about it many times, so I'm going to go back and kind of research, maybe what would work for me.
Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of options out there. There's definitely lots to choose from as far as the satellite communicators, and being that there's more of them, the systems are more reliable and more robust. I remember the first spot that I got, I was an early adopter. It just basically was a check-in. Like, you had no idea that the check-in worked. And of course, it had the emergency call as well, the emergency help button. But otherwise, it had there wasn't two-way. It was only one way. Now we've got two-way, we've got texting, and there's all kinds of stuff, though. So lots of choices there.
Right.
One of the other things you do learn in an advanced first aid is dealing with emergency services. So if you are having an ambulance come in, a helicopter come in, a plane come in, whatever, you can figure out in advance, while you're waiting for them to arrive, how do we get them in here? How do we get you onto the device we're going to use to get you out? Is there room for them to land? Is there room for them to turn around? I was thinking about the ambulance turning around. So when an ambulance has to come in, it's going to have to turn around. So finding that area ahead of time and organizing that can help make it a little bit easier for them to get in and out. Also a little bit faster had it been a medical emergency, if they were having to go out. So a minor detail, but I think that can be something that can be thought about in a situation like this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, those are all things that we've kind of learned just as time has gone by. We've had other incidents, nothing that requires medical attention or ambulances, but people have crashed on, a sandy corner or something like that.
Right.
And yeah, we've certainly learned a lot from that episode, and we're getting older. We just try to not put ourselves in that position anymore. And, but we still like to get out there, and there's nothing like getting off the beaten path.
I know.
On your motorcycle.
There's no doubt. Anything else you learned from that incident in particular?
Yeah, I just learned that I got a lot of good friends. We're still good friends today. And, just basically the bike. And I know, people will say, when you're going to go for a motorcycle tour, these people that ride around the world and so on, what's the best bike? A lot of times they say the bike you have, but the KLR, in my opinion, is a great tool. Like we've all said, it does a lot of things really good, just nothing, excellent. So if we were to do that again, I would certainly try to be on a lighter motorcycle. If we were going to be riding through the sand, I just would try to prepare myself with a little bit lighter machine.
Doug, that is an excellent point, and you're right. It's so often said that the right bike is the bike that you have. But if you are doing something like this, particularly off of roads, onto trails or rough riding, it is something to consider for sure. Because what you said earlier was you said about your skill level. So a KLR 650 is I think it's a great bike. I love the KLR. I always have. But it is a bike that can be a lot of fun off-road to ride, or it can be a real tank, depending on the skill level. So it's about it's a combination of things to look at, is what you said earlier, was matching your skill level to the bike. So if you feel you don't have the skill to ride your KLR 650 or the strength to deal with it, which, you say you do, but if you didn't, these are things that might make you think that, well, maybe I need a smaller bike. I've got to match my bike to my skill level. And I think that's an excellent point.
Right. Yeah. And I will say, though, with my 2009 KLR, which is just a teeny bit heavier than the 2003, but running the soft panniers, when I ride that bike now, it feels like a 300 compared to that other KLR with the hard panniers, the ammo boxes.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Just that much weight loss gives you just way more confidence when I'm zooming down these back dirt roads around my house.
Yeah.
I just feel I'm standing up. I know I've got soft panniers back there. If something happens, I don't have that nightmare in the back of my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have so many options now available. We're very lucky at this time right now. There are so many options to get lighter weight stuff. Camping gear, there's so much camping gear that's lightweight. And then, like you say, you can go with soft panniers. There's tons of soft panniers out there to choose from. You can find something that suits your style. And of course, bikes. We have a lot of bikes to choose from. So you really can match something to your ride style and maybe what you want to do, what you want to handle as far as weight goes when you're riding into some tough stuff. How's your foot now?
Yeah, it's fine. It's just a little bit of a weather station, but other than that, yeah, I've got pretty much full range. One of the screws that they did put in went through my fibula into my tibia, I believe, the big leg bone. And that screw went through into both bones to stabilize it. And they said that at some point it would break. Now, I don't know if it's broke yet or not, but, I haven't had any x-rays to see if it is. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, no issues.
Wow, I had no idea they would do that. They put a screw in and plan on it breaking. I would think it would have had to have broke. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to move your leg properly. Yeah,
and I definitely sometimes walk like I have a rock in my shoe, but for the most part, 90% of the time, it's no issues at all. I'm aware of what's there. If I'm jumping off from something, the tailgate of a truck or something, I just know I don't jump down onto that leg, whether that would mean anything at this point or not. But there's other bits and pieces that they installed in me, through the years. So, just I've got a lot of hardware in there.
Right. Well, Doug, thank you very much for sharing your story. It's great to talk to you. I really appreciate that.
No, thanks, Jim. It's a pleasure. And thanks for all you do for the adventure community.
Oh, thank you, Doug. I really appreciate that. I was speaking with Doug Oosterhouse from his home in Howell, Michigan. Now, we've got some photos from Doug's adventures, maybe I should say misadventures, in the show notes for this episode on our website, adventureriderradio.com. Now, before we wrap up this episode, because this was a sand crash, we talked some about sand. Sand is feared by so many riders. I want to play part of an interview I did with someone who knows sand probably better than most every rider out there. He's an absolute expert in sand, and that's Jimmy Lewis. It was a few years back that we talked, and Jimmy gave some important concepts in sand riding. Well, let's dig into sand, pun intended.
Yeah.
So it's sand. Sand, you're the guru of sand. I mean, you live in sand, right? I mean, it surrounds you.
Yeah, we're in a desert, so of course it's a kind of a familiar terrain, and I love riding in sand. I kind of always have for some reason, and so it and believe me, the very first time I rode an adventure bike in sand, and this was a GS 1100, quite a long time ago, I was terrified, and I can understand it, especially it's funny we talk about some other sports like mountain biking and skiing and stuff. The minute I got into it, I tensed up because I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel familiar. And knowing what I know now and what I teach on the motorcycle, the tensing up part is what causes the majority of problems. But trust me, I know what sand feels like for the regular guy. I've experienced it before, not lately, but sometimes.
Well, yeah, sand. I mean, most people see sand, and that's I think the one I hear the most. But people say they hate sand. They're just terrified of sand because of the feeling that they get, and it's difficult to get going on. It's difficult to turn and maneuver. I mean, it's got a lot of things with it, but it is kind of fun, isn't it? If you start, I mean, I got a little bit of the hang of sand, and I quite enjoy it. I think it's fun to play in.
It is, but not on a heavy loaded adventure bike for sure. It should always raise your awareness because what sand really is in the grand scheme of things, it's a lack of traction. And then it's a very uneven surface. So if you think about, hey, I'm comfortable riding down the street, and why is this? It's because the street provides very consistent traction and generally a very consistent, flat, smooth surface. So you take those two things away, and that's all that sand is. And it's really no different than any other loose traction situation like mud and gravel. And like mud and sand are kind of similar. Like gravel is really different because gravel is like very, very inconsistent. At least sand has a certain amount of consistency to it, just in that, it's malleable. It's not gonna move away from you all at once for the most part.
And the one thing with sand I find, in compared to mud always seems to have those hidden ruts and things that are in the mud that throw you off so much, whereas sand, not so much, at least not that I've found. You just tend a little more predictable.
Yeah, it can. And that's why I do like the sand. It is definitely predictable. And so I'll tell you the good things about sand. So everybody's always concerned with their seat height in their motorcycle. Generally, when you're in sand, you sink down a little bit, so you get a lower seat height.
Good point.
That's a bonus.
Yeah.
Because the sand wraps around the tire and stuff. When you stop, the bike will almost balance itself sometimes. So,
right.
And you've got to do 80% of the 90% of the work to get it pretty balanced, and then the sand will actually hold your bike up for you.
Mm-hmm.
And And then the other thing is it's kind of softer than landing in rocks if you do tip over, and it doesn't do as much damage to the motorcycle. So sand has some very important good factors that people don't really look at.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And I think I have a lot more experience with that than you. I mean, picking up my bike in the sand. The sand's much more forgiving when I drop in the sand. It's not even a concern. I don't worry about it.
Yeah. So some of the intricacies of the sand is when you tip over, a lot of people think it's soft, but it can actually catch you because you actually, you dig in and it can stop you. So sometimes when, falling over, you land on your shoulder or your head, it can be pretty bad.
Oh yeah, right. If you got any speed with you, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
You don't slide, you stick.
Right. Well, with sand, is there like an overall like sort of secret or mindset that you have to have when you're approaching? I know we're going to get into all the technical things of starting up and turning it, et cetera. But before we do that, is there some sort of secret? I mean, is there something you tell people right off the bat when you're teaching them about sand that say, hey, keep this in mind?
Yes, it's that nothing changes when you go in the sand. If you're riding proper, every place else, nothing that you do changes when you enter the sand, because you want to remain balanced and loose on the bike. And so you hear people say, oh, you need to get over the back, you need to lighten up the front and all that stuff. It's like none of that stuff. That means get out of balance and get out of control, and you don't want to do any of that. So the secret is really to try to stay relaxed and then understand, and this is the hard thing, understand where the proper speed is, what's the ideal speed, because for sure going slow, really slow in sand is more difficult than going what we'll call the ideal speed. It depends on your bike and your ability and a lot of other stuff. But if you don't know what the ideal speed is, you don't know what too fast is. And that's where the problems start occurring.
So how do you know? How do you feel for that ideal speed? You do hear this a lot. I mean, this is the common thing. Everybody says, get on the throttle in sand, accelerate. Well, you can't keep accelerating forever. So how do you know what the perfect speed is?
So here's what we teach. You learn the perfect speed by getting comfortable going slow, because it's more difficult. Getting comfortable going slow, and then you're comfortable, and then you go, okay, now I can go a little bit faster. Not just go faster, go a little bit faster. And then you're comfortable, and a little bit faster, and you're comfortable, a little bit faster. And then you go a little bit faster and you become uncomfortable again, because the same things that were happening at the slower speed start happening at the faster speed, the same sensation. So at this point you can identify, ooh, that's too fast. This isn't going to get any better by going faster. I need to, make sure that I'm doing all the things at the slower speed. And as you get more comfortable, your speed will increase. But if you go right past, quote, that ideal speed because somebody told you to go faster or get over the back or do any of this stuff, gas it, you will end up never feeling comfortable in sand and never learning.
That makes perfect sense. So what you're doing, you're starting out slow, and you're obviously having to work with your balance and control of the bike. And then once you've got that done, then you start to speed up and find the easy point. So you're riding in the easy zone.
Exactly.
Or easier.
That's exactly it.
Okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense. So where do we start? Do we start, I guess, with the pull away, right?
Well, yeah, you start by just, getting going. And most sand is, just by the nature of the way, sand works, is level. It's really rare you get in much steep up or down unless you're, quote, in sand dunes. Sand pretty much likes to sort of level itself out. And generally it's on, it's in sand washes or on 2-track roads that just gradually become sandy. Most of the time, sand actually has a base to it. In other words, if you start digging down with your foot, you're going to go down 3-4 inches and you're going to hit something that's harder. It just basically the sand would just spread out over this harder surface. And then it did what it naturally does. It levels out when either water or wind comes across it. So everybody sees sand and they're like, oh, and you realize it's only 3, 4, maybe 5 inches deep or something most of the time. And 5 would be a lot. Well, you're not going to get stuck in 5 inches. It's just, unless you just start spinning like crazy and dig right through the sand and into the dirt. And if you were spinning your tire on regular dirt, just like you are on the sand, or the sand gives you the ability to spin it, and you keep going in the dirt, of course, you're not going to get any traction. And when we watch riders go to take off, they think they've got to go and spin, and they're trying to go from 0 to whatever the ideal speed is. Like maybe it's 7, maybe it's 12, maybe it's 20 miles an hour. They want to go that speed instantly. And it's all because they're out of balance, because they feel like they're going to tip over until they achieve the speed and momentum that's going to mask the balance that they don't have. This is what we talk about in our school all the time. Everything centers around being balanced.
I love that about the way you teach, because everything, once you learn that, everything you say always seems to go back to that, and it makes sense.
It is. And so so what we teach in sand is if you can just go 1 foot or 2 feet, you're not going to tip over. So you just learn to get going. And if you learn that you don't even have to spin, I do this demonstration on my bike where I actually bury it almost to the skid plate. If I go to the skid plate, it's over. But I bury it almost to the skid plate. And I don't know if you've ever seen those Toyota trucks that have that button you push and it gets itself unstuck.
No.
There's a button they push, and it's called crawl or something, that just wiggles the tires. And it actually takes the dirt from in front of the tire and pushes it under the tire, and it lifts the truck back out. I do the same thing with my motorcycle. It takes a ton of throttle and clutch feel to not spin it, but you can get it buried. And it requires some body movement, some rocking of the bike, helping it go forward. You can't just be planted with your extra weight on the seat and expect it to dig out. But if you take your weight and you kind of start rocking the bike and you use the tire, you can actually take the dirt from the front of the tire, the sand from the front of the tire, and push it underneath the tire and literally lift the bike out of the sand. And it takes patience, and it takes a lot of throttle and clutch, but because everybody just wants to gas it and go, but you're just going to dig the hole. And I always say, if you're going down faster than you're going forward, you need to stop. You're doing something wrong. You're only going to keep going down and eventually skid plate, and then wheel has no traction. And so there's a lot of little techniques that go to it, using your weight and inertia to kind of help the bike get going. But once you learn that, if you just very gingerly use the maybe half of a horsepower it takes to move that bike forward without digging a hole, as opposed to trying to do it with 17 to 40 horsepower, or in some cases 100 horsepower, you just need to get it rolling. It's that initial roll away that determines what's going to happen in the next 5 feet, and then the rest of your ride, however long you want it to be. So we start by just getting people comfortable moving, and then before they tip over, because usually they forget to do something like pick up their foot, that knocks them out of bounds. They're so tense on the bars that when the bike starts leaning one way, they get knocked out of balance. Then everybody's out of balance and they fall over. So, but most people will not fall over going 1, 2, 3 feet at a time. So we learn them this, and then we work on the next steps.
So pulling away is not dumping the clutch. It's enough power to get yourself moving, and that's it. That's what you're saying.
Most of the time. So here's where it's always different. There's sometimes when I, I'm in kind of deep sand, and this would be sand that could be, we'll call it more bottomless type of sand, where you're just not, you're not going to, you can do that technique, but you're going to dig. And we always have to go back to, you have to have a good tire, but we'll get to that in a minute. But there's sometimes when I literally click the bike in a second gear, I feel it start to dig down and stuff. I stop and I go, okay, this wheel speed, and generally it's in first gear, and I'm giving it too much power. I notice it going down. Well, there's a time when I click it into second gear, and then I gas it and dump the clutch. But the reason for this is I want a higher wheel speed at a lower power level, which allows the bike to grab more traction. So the initial spin and burst, yeah, but where you get traction in sand is when you back off the throttle. That's when the tire, and this is all the time in the sand, the tire, when you finally quit having it spin and allow it to start grabbing traction, that's what it does. It grabs traction.
You mentioned tire. I guess we probably should have talked about that right off the bat. And I think I remember you mentioning one time to me about the you like the Kenda big block. I think even over the TKC 80 in the sand.
Correct. They're exactly the same. Once you're in the sand, a lot of the stuff, the tire brands don't make a whole lot of difference. It's the shape of the tire that'll make all the difference. And we're talking about the knobbies on it. And believe it or not, the most important part of the tire when you're actually in the sand is the sides. So not the center strip. It's when you start going around the sides. The more open the block you can have on the sides, the better, because that's what's going to mostly save you when stuff starts going wrong. Because all of a sudden, when you start tipping a little bit, when you need that tire to really grip, you're off the center. And it can be, I ride tires that are literally worn out, so they're almost smooth in the middle, but I can ride them in the sand just fine, because when the bike starts leaning over to the side, when I need that knob to dig in and grab, there's still good knobbies on the side of the tire. And so when we start talking about more round profile tires, they'll work great if you're going perfectly straight, nice and flat, and good. They'll do okay, but it's when they start tipping over, there's nothing to kind of get you that little burst of power that's going to help, catch your balance when you need it. And the other thing that I think is a pretty big myth is airing down. As far as from the normal pressure I run all the time off road, which I run 27 PSI on road and off, because I'm generally pretty mixed between the two, mostly off road. But anything, when you start going down to these, low tire pressures and stuff, yeah, there's a point where a very low tire pressure will help, but it's not going to take much to knock that tire off the bead at that pressure. And I'm talking like, 2 and 3 PSI, because when you're down at like 8 PSI, all it makes the bike do is wobble more and, wobble on the tires, but it doesn't seem to get me any better traction. I've tested this. I've tried all the different tire pressures, and on the motorcycle. On a car, it makes all the difference in the world, but on a motorcycle, it's insignificant, I would say.
Yeah, I was going to mention that on a 4-wheel drive vehicle, it'll make a huge difference. But so yeah, I just want to go back to that. So you're saying knobby tires are king, and I guess anything less doesn't really have a place in the sand?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. Even some of the 50-50 tires and stuff, though, it depends on how big the block is open on the side and kind of more on the edge of the tire. And if you run your handle along it, it feels smooth. You don't feel anything grab your fingers. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's probably not going to do much for you in the sand.
And 27 PSI, that's for your rear tire you're running.
Front and rear.
Front and rear.
That's what I run all the time.
Regardless of the tire too.
There's like 2 to 3 PSI difference for me. And, as long as we're talking about a full size, 1,000 cc sized adventure bikes, that's my go-to tire pressure. And it has been for a long time.
It surprises me you're saying about not airing down for the sand, because that is such a common thing you hear with motorcycles. People tell you, big adventure bike, air it down for the sand.
Well, if you're like 35, which is like a normal pressure, mm-hmm. Going down to 27 is not going to help your traction at all in the sand, but it will help with the bump compliance. That's the reason I go down, is to get the tire to be part of the suspension. But until I was down to like literally 3 PSI did I feel a benefit in how much traction I was able to get. But the bike was so wallowy on the tire, and if it just caught a rut or something or hit a rock, it wasn't going to be good. So. And I don't really feel like airing down every time I come to sand.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. And that's got to make people feel better too. I mean, if anyone wants to try that tire pressure.
I can see, if you come from a tire, car world and 4-wheel drive, it definitely does work. And so
yeah.
I can see where that could be a misconception. And just because that's the way it is there, it has to work here. And I'm here to tell you that in my world, it absolutely doesn't.
And you find 27 is enough that to protect your rims and survive on the road, yet soft enough, like you said, for bump compliance off-road.
Yeah, it gives you bump compliance off-road, but it doesn't wallow on-road that much. And it's a compromise, like anything. Yeah. It's in anything lower. Yeah, you can get a little bit better bump compliance, but then your wallow on-road goes up enough to where it's not acceptable. So, and everybody's a little bit different. Like I know some guys at like 32 and some guys at like 29 and some guys will go down to like 24. And I ride the 24 and I'm like, how do you ride this on the road? And then I realize it's like, you don't, you at least you don't feel very confident.
was Jimmy Lewis talking with me back in March of 2021. We've got a link to that episode. If you'd like to hear the full episode, I'd strongly advise you listen to it because he has so many great tips in there, along with the links for Jimmy Lewis. That's all in the show notes for this episode at our website, adventureriderradio.com.
Hey, I just want to remind you that this episode has been brought to you by Green Chili Adventure Gear, greenchiliadv.com, Motobreeze Chain Oiler at motobreeze.com, and Best Rest Products at cyclepump.com. And we'd really appreciate it if anytime you're dealing with these companies, anytime email or otherwise, let them know you heard them here on Adventure Rider Radio. Well, that about wraps up another episode of Adventure Rider Radio, and we sure hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we did making it. Special thanks to our producer and you. Thank you very much for being a part of it by listening to the show. Hey, the show is built on a model of advertising and listener support. I really want to ask you this. If you enjoy what we do here each week and on Adventure Rider Radio and each month on Adventure Rider Radio Raw, we would really appreciate it. If you're not doing it already, if you would consider supporting the show, drop by our website, adventureriderradio.com, click on support. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but we would really like it if you would look at that patron option, and you can give any amount on a monthly basis. It's just once a month. And in that month, we'll put out at least 5 shows, in some months more. But in any case, we would really appreciate it if you would drop by and have a look. And the other thing you can do is you can give us a 5-star rating anywhere you find your podcast. That helps other people find the show. Now, it's time to get out there and ride your bike if you can. My name is Jim Martin. Thank you very much for listening. And wait, before I say it, I just want to say that just about the same time you're listening to this, there's a new episode of Raw. That's the other show that we do that comes out once a month. It comes out on the 21st of every month, and the episode has just dropped on Friday the 21st. So the 21st of every month. Anyway, get out there and ride your bike. My name is Jim Martin. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.
Hi, this is Chris, the blind scooter guy, and you're listening to Adventure Rider Radio.